A political war is raging inside the Republican Party as disagreements over government spending, immigration policy, trade, and other issues pit factions of the GOP against each other. The Hill's House leadership reporter Emily Brooks joins us to discuss. She's author of the Movement newsletter, which tracks influence and debates steering politics on the right. Hi, Emily. Okay, so let's set the table here. On one side, you have the populist nationalists. On the other side, libertarians. Who are some of the important players, and what do they believe?
Well, you know, the populist sentiment in the Republican Party has really been bubbling up in the Trump era, and a lot of his political instincts are a result of that. But really the biggest player you have right here who is really driving some populist thinking, in some sense, it's really clashing with the libertarians in the party, is Stephen Miller, the deputy White House chief of staff, who is really going after the libertarians in the party, like Republican Senator Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, who have voiced opposition to the one big beautiful bill of Trump's spending priorities based off of concerns about its deficit impact. It would add estimated by the Congressional Budget Office around $2.4 trillion to the national debt. So really going after them there, saying that they are hampering the president's immigration agenda by opposing this bill. So it's really starting to heat up with public war on social media and elsewhere, and really escalating this week.
Yeah, you mentioned Senator Rand Paul. He was apparently uninvited from the annual White House picnic. Does that show how ugly this fight is getting?
Now, this is something that Rand Paul told reporters, saying that he was uninvited to the annual congressional picnic, saying that this is very petty. It seems to be something that the White House is doing in response to his opposition to the bill. I will say that President Trump did say on his social media platform, Truth Social, that Rand Paul was, of course, invited and that his family was welcome. But also, you know, Thomas Massie had also posted on social media saying that he was uninvited to the picnic. We'll have yet to catch up with him today, but we'll see what that is. But it just goes to show to the level of, you know, even maybe petty back and forth about these little social events to where this war is escalating within the party.
And you know, you write that White House advisor Stephen Miller is the one leading this fight on behalf of the populist nationalists against the libertarians. It seems like the battlefield right now is the so-called big, beautiful bill. This is the sweeping legislative package that contains much of President Trump's agenda. Libertarians say it will explode the national debt. Populist nationalists kind of promote it primarily as a tax cut and immigration crackdown. Who do you think is winning the debate?
Well, right now, I think the momentum is in favor of the one big beautiful bill, and it eventually passing the Senate and the House in some form. Leaders seem pretty confident about that, but exactly what the details of that legislation will be are still up to debate. The Senate is considering it now, but it is sort of in danger right now because you have members like Rand Paul voicing concerns not only about the overall impact of the legislation, which is mostly due to the impact of extending those Trump tax cuts for another, you know, permanent, some of them permanently, some new tax cuts like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, but also raising concerns about the boost in funding for border and immigration enforcement measures. He's questioning how much money does the administration really need to continue and finish building the wall on the southern border, particularly when there are there's such it's essentially locked down. The border has never been less porous than it has been essentially in decades under President Trump now, and so he's questioning whether they really need some of that funding. But then you have Stephen Miller saying this is, you know, pointing to the riots in Los Angeles and the actions that the administration has taken there, saying the administration needs this funding to support ICE and arresting migrants and deporting them, and saying that libertarians are essentially supporting that. And of course, libertarians ideologically have never been quite the segment to really support mass deportations or the ideas of that. So Stephen Miller is really trying to reframe the debate as being about the deportation and border security efforts.
You know, I'm old enough to remember the Tea Party movement when all these Republicans swept into power on a promise to cut spending and that the national debt was one of the greatest threats to the American experiment. That the vast majority of Republicans in Congress now support the big, beautiful bill. What do you think that says about the evolution of the conservative party, conservative movement?
Well, I think some of this is a little bit still up for debate. You know, you will talk to Republicans and Republican leaders, and they're essentially denying this math from the Congressional Budget Office, saying that you shouldn't count the deficit impact of extending the tax cuts, which are current policy. And then you also have them making promises that more is going to be done to claw back funding that was approved under Democratic administrations, maybe lower funding in other areas. However, it is a very slim majority in the House and in the Senate. And so will they get all the Republicans on board to do that? To be determined. And I think that some of these are still live issues. And that is the big question is, does this whole Tea Party sentiment, government slashing, cost cutting sentiment have legs to actually do something in the Trump administration? I mean, you do see some resistance to that from the president himself, saying he doesn't want to touch Social Security or Medicare, and those are some of the biggest areas of spending in the government. And so we'll see how much that they can do.
You know, it strikes me that Elon Musk spoke to some of the libertarian concerns with his criticisms of the bill. That lasted about a week before he kind of relented and now seems to be begging to be let back into the president's fold. Is that kind of a microcosm of the libertarians' plight?
Well, I think it's maybe not so much a microcosm as Elon Musk was a major driver, I think, of this sentiment, particularly on his social platform, X.com, formerly Twitter, with all of these conservative activists on there really also following Elon Musk, voicing also opposition to the One Big Beautiful Bill because of the deficit impact, and then you having to have people like Stephen Miller go on the social platform pushing back on those arguments, explaining it, pushing back on people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie. So I think that, you know, whether Elon Musk, he does seem to be a lot quieter about his concerns with the One Big Beautiful Bill, trying to, you know, get back in those good graces perhaps, but there is going to be a major test of whether his influence and that kind of sentiment that Elon Musk clearly promotes in some sense in wanting to slash government and costs, how much of that is going to be core to the Republican Party's identity.
I wonder if there is libertarian strength that may not be as visible among elected Republican leaders, but is present in the base of the party, especially when it comes to issues like foreign policy, tariffs, the debt, government surveillance, things like civil rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a number of areas where the libertarians or some even libertarian leanings are part of this live issue and debate happening in the Republican Party, particularly not only on this bill, but in foreign policy. How involved should the United States get in some of these global conflicts, and things even like surveillance? There is a big debate in Congress in the last cycle about whether some foreign surveillance powers that more privacy-concerned Republicans argued have been used to sweep up data of Americans should be reauthorized, whether they should have a warrant in order to go for that. Those are things that are going to be continued to be considered and debated. But yeah, I think that there are certainly some aspects of that sort of small government sentiment that is still at the core and base of the Republican Party, but a lot of President Trump's instincts of trying to wage his power as president is a little bit going against that, but we'll see how it goes.
What do you think are the long-term implications of this ideological struggle between the populist nationalists and the libertarians? Like, if there's a lasting split in the party, does that potentially do damage to the coalition that got Donald Trump elected?
Yeah, well, this is something that I'm very interested in following and writing about in my newsletter, The Movement, is will that libertarian conservative fusionism that really defined the party for a lot of the decades before Trump came on the scene, whether that can survive. And, you still see some remnants of that, even politically, how important it is to Trump in the last election cycle. He went to the Libertarian Party and spoke at their convention and essentially made a promise to free Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the Silk Road, and pardon him, which a promise that he followed through on. And so you do see how the Libertarians are still an important part of their coalition in some sense. But now that he's in power, he's not going to presumably try to seek a third term or re-election, which is not constitutionally able to do. Does he cast the Libertarians aside, kind of side with Stephen Miller more on a lot of these points as he tries to advance his own policy goals, such as those mass deportations and initiatives like that? There's certainly more of an economic populist sentiment rising up in the Republican Party that is really fueling a lot of Trump's thinking as well, particularly on tariffs. And so how long will that libertarian sentiment last? We'll see.
Well, it'll be a fascinating story to continue to follow, and that's why people should go over to thehill.com and subscribe to The Movement. That is your newsletter following all the developments inside the conservative movement and on the right in American politics. Emily Brooks, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.